All right, welcome back, everyone, to another episode of, Knots versus Core version 30, which I keep saying took me out of retirement on Bitcoin content, and got together with my old podcast partner Jimmy Song, and we are bringing you this series. This is episode 4 of the series, and we wanted to bring on one more developer that would do his best job to articulate the position of the core team as to what went on to bring about the latest changes in Bitcoin code with the core version 30. So without any further ado, I would like to welcome Murch to the show. I know Murch from his days from Chaincode Labs in New York and the BitDevs events that he used to host, that I used to participate in somewhat, or at least attend in, and learn about what's going on with Bitcoin development. And of course, welcome Jimmy as well. Jimmy, do a quick intro, and then we'll hand it off to Murch.
Yeah, I funny story. I've actually known Murch longer than I've known you, Tone, because I knew Murch from the Bitcoin Stack Exchange days back in 2015 when I used to actually answer some of those questions. So good to have you, Mark, or Murch. I'm not sure what to call you, but yeah, it's good to have you, and yeah, hopefully we have a very clear communication on what Core v30 does and what it doesn't do, and we want to give you the space to explain things clearly to this audience.
Awesome. Thank you for having me. Yeah, I go by Murch. It's happened before that people started talking about Mark and they're like, who's Mark? Yeah. So Murch is just how people know me in Bitcoin. It's easier. Yeah, thanks for having me. So what would you like to start on? Just what's in the release?
A little intro of yourself. By the way, guys, this is being live streamed on Twitter and YouTube. Please like, retweet. I just did that. Just a reminder to the guests as well as everyone watching. The more people understand the Knots versus Bitcoin Core, I guess, discussion. I don't like calling it a debate. I like calling it just a discussion because there is a lot on both sides that people just don't understand. And this is what these videos are here to try and help with. Yeah, Murch, a little bit on your background. And I am going to refer to you as a Bitcoin Core developer. And I'm going to pull up your Twitter handle and some other things while you speak. Go for it.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, so I've been interested in Bitcoin since around 2011, 2012. I, like many of us, just found an article on Slashdot and was like, haha, nerd money, that'll never work. And I looked at it again, and when it floated through my stream again, and read the white paper and thought, oh, interesting, and been hooked since then. I discovered Bitcoin Stack Exchange pretty early, so I, like Jimmy said, I was even more involved then. I'm still a moderator of Bitcoin Stack Exchange, but I've been contributing a lot of answers about technical questions on Bitcoin Stack Exchange for many years. Did my master thesis on coin selection in 2016, then joined BitGo, worked there for several years on the Bitcoin team, on the Bitcoin backend, and did some coin selection work, among other things. And now since 2020, I'm a full-time open source contributor. I had been with Chaincode Labs for, I think, 4 years. Yeah, a little over 4 years. And since the start of the year, I'm now with Localhost Research. Localhost Research is maybe an organization you haven't heard of yet. It's a newly founded nonprofit 501c3 here in the Bay Area, in the area of San Francisco. We're a small team still. We contribute to open source projects, mostly Bitcoin Core currently. Right now we have 5 developers in-house, 4 full-time, 1 visiting scholar for 3 months. And yeah, we're completely donation-based. So new org on the other side of the continent from Chaincode Labs.
All right. Oh, let me put my camera back on. So guys, please follow Murch on Twitter. And I guess let's begin. Let's just jump right into it. This was the official statement from bitcoincore.org. I really thought this was in the video description. Unfortunately, it's not. I will add it to the video description.
Wait, that's the Core 30 release notes. I think you want the letter, no?
I did want the letter, but I mean, they're similar. I did want the letter. Is it in here as well? Is
Yeah, well, click blog on up at the top, and then
I also sent it here in the chat.
Yeah.
Oh, you sent it to me in the chat. Perfect.
Yeah,
I see it.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool. Oh, opened in the wrong place. Here we go. Right.
There you go.
Here it is. That's the letter, and your name is right there, Murch. You're there. You're also on the core release notes, and it was not easy getting someone whose name is in here to come and do the show, but because a lot of people think it may be controversial, but that's not what our goal here is. So can you just talk about this and with the letter, and how did I guess my question is, what thinking led the Bitcoin Core team to alter the size of, or remove the op return limit altogether? And then we'll talk about the outcome of that, which caught a lot of you guys somewhat blindsided, and what is happening right now with the situation.
Okay. Yeah, you're not pulling punches, jumping right in. So maybe first about the statement. There's been a lot of debate about mempool policy for the last 2 years. Maybe to very briefly touch on what mempool policy is. Obviously, at the consensus level, we have rules, what is valid in blocks, what transactions might do. And those are the rules. If you violate the rules, you're just not part of the Bitcoin blockchain. Your block will be rejected by other miners. Your transaction will not be included in blocks, right? And at the mempool policy level, we have a different set of rules that is stricter than the consensus rules. And these mempool policies are intended to help shape what we propagate on the gossip network between nodes, right? So for the most part, there's you might ask, why are those different rules in the first place? And mempool policy is intended to protect network resources, node resources, to nudge maybe a little bit the behavior on the network, although we're largely getting away from that part. And then we have upgrade hooks that we try to protect, because we've spent a lot of time on the Bitcoin protocol, which is separate from Bitcoin Core development. On Bitcoin protocol, a lot of effort has been spent on making the Bitcoin protocol more extensible and adding more functionality in the past 1.5 decades. And so some of the policy also is to protect these upgrade hooks, like future SegWit versions or the annex or other things.
Transaction version, yeah.
Sorry, say again?
Transaction version.
Yeah, sure. Transaction version, block version, other things like that would be upgrade hooks, right? So for the most part, policy is more strict, but if you put stuff into blocks that violates policy, that's still consensus valid, it'll be in the blockchain, it'll be probably part of the most worked chain, it'll propagate from every node to every other node, and is part of history. So when we're talking about the op return limit, we're talking about a mempool policy that was present in Bitcoin node software since, I think it's 2014. Correct me if I'm wrong. And we are talking about a rule that only affects unconfirmed transactions. When transactions are in blocks, these rules do not apply anymore, right? So much for the staging, maybe. So a couple years, 3 years ago now, I think, someone described a construction of Bitcoin script, how they could embed data in the witness section of transactions. So that's a bit of a mouthful. The witness section is a part of transaction inputs that we use to store data that proves that people legitimately spent funds, and that was introduced with SegWit, which segregated this witness data to a separate section in transactions. Yes, it's in transactions. It's definitely part of blocks too, just to get that out of the way. And this witness data has the interesting property that we only really need to read it once when we try to validate a transaction. So the witness data was imbued with a discount because we only needed to validate unconfirmed transactions once. Of course, it's getting written to the blockchain because it's part of the transaction. And then it's basically only ever used again when someone asks for that block and we send the block to them. So this envelope or inscription construction was introduced, described, and then that was a part of the permitted standard stuff in transactions. And that took off pretty quickly when people started using it. In the matter of a few months, a huge number of transactions were using these inscriptions, and people were creating a lot of transactions that were offering a lot of fees for block space. Ever since then, mempool policy had become a little more of a topic. Gloria and I wrote in Optech, in the Bitcoin Optech newsletter, a series of 10, like a column of 10 weeks, waiting for confirmation, where we dove into what mempool policy is, what we're trying to achieve with mempool policy. And yeah, so I guess you have the right person on to talk a little bit about this topic, because I'm exactly plugged into exactly that topic for several years now. So you asked about the statement that we put out on the Bitcoin Core site earlier this year, I think February, maybe it was the end of last year. Someone proposed that we should start restricting inscription transactions at the mempool policy level. And that kicked off or restarted a debate that what exactly can be achieved with mempool policy, how mempool policy affects what ends up in blocks. This is interesting in the context of some mining pools being more aggressive about accepting transactions out of band and accepting extra payment in products like Marathon Slipstream, where they deliberately enforce fewer rules than most nodes on their mempool and try to make an extra buck on the side there. So when we found that almost all, or at least all of the Bitcoin Core contributors that had a strong opinion one way or another, agreed that we saw things regarding mempool policy and relay policy very similarly, we decided to write up a little bit our understanding of what we're trying to achieve with mempool policy and what we're not trying to achieve with mempool policy, and that became the statement that we're talking about. All right, I talked a lot. Any questions?
No, that was great.
That's great.
That was great. I kind of, sorry. I forgot to mention one thing in the intro is that Murch did an awesome interview with Pleb Underground from TabConf. This was only published a few days ago. Oh, no, actually, I'm sorry. It was published last month. Why did I think this was more recent? And it only has like 10 views on YouTube. One of them is mine. I listened to it, and it was excellent. So almost as a prequel to this, because I don't want you to just I don't want you to repeat yourself on everything you said here. So for those that are watching, the slightly more technical discussion will take place right here. So you can go back and watch it. It's on YouTube or on Twitter. So definitely check this out. It's linked in the video description as well. All right. So, but the one thing here that I do want you to comment on that you discussed in that video, Murch, is it sounded like what Core was doing to me as an outsider is, instead of everyone accusing Core that they are, infiltrated and they're bad actors and all that stuff, you guys were trying to do the opposite by leveling the playing field. Basically, someone could put all this garbage into the op return and then get a big miner. We don't have to name a miner, but in the future, it could be multiple big miners. Send them money on the side and have them mine it to where now only certain miners get an advantage of mining these transactions with which a lot of data in the op return. And one of the things was, well, that's not really fair to all the miners. We need to somehow level the playing field. But instead of doing something drastic, like trying to create a fork, let's just get rid of this op return limit. Anyone that wants to put real crap on the network like ordinals, it's still cheaper for them to do it the current way, which is a bit of a, I don't want to say bug, but I guess an advantage of the last update that was done. And this visceral reaction, like basically this, everything I heard Roger Ver say back in the day when he was trying to get rid of Core is now back from the people that used to defend Core. And this is a little bit crazy and probably caught you guys by surprise. Can you comment on what I just said?
Yeah, thank you for your summary of what I described in Pleb Underground. Yeah, let me try to motivate why we felt that the up return mempool policy wasn't as valuable anymore as it had been in 2014. So in 2014, when the up return mempool policy was introduced, counterparty was happening, and generally block space was completely under-demanded. So what people were worried about was that that these counterparty enthusiasts would spend very little money to produce a lot of data in what is today basically stamps, writing it directly to payment outputs that are basically indistinguishable from actual payment outputs that we need to keep in the UTXO set forever, and use all of the under-demanded block space to essentially bloat the UTXO set. So what the designers of the original up return rules were trying to do was to give a less harmful, a harm reduction way of putting a little bit of data into the blockchain. They debated 40 bytes or 80 bytes, and I think people said, well, a 64-byte hash or something might be interesting, plus or maybe a 32-byte hash and a pub key. So for some reason they decided 80 bytes. I wasn't super involved back then, right? It's hard to go back and well, it's not that hard.
I think it was 40 and then it turned to 80 later.
It was 40, but I think it turned to 80. It was set to 80 before 40 properly whatever was deployed. BitMEX Research had a very good deep dive article on the exact limits. Please feel free to double check and read that again.
I mean, he's going to be on the show in a couple episodes, so
splendid.
We can talk about that. Yeah.
He should probably take a look. But anyway, so it had been 80 bytes for over a decade at this point. And the concern that block space was completely under-demanded, that we had a sixth full blocks or so, is today not the case anymore. Block space had been almost completely demanded for several years now. And the other characteristic that this was just a little bit of nascent people putting data into the blockchain, and we sort of didn't want to encourage that. We sort of got completely overtaken on the right side here with this inscription envelope thing and this enormous interest in NFTs on Bitcoin recently. And so, as you said, Tone, putting data on the Bitcoin blockchain has a much cheaper, established way now. There's a lot of tooling that has been built by the people that are interested in this stuff. It is as easy as going on a website, posting some data into a field and clicking a button, paying a Lightning invoice or whatever they do. And then these transactions just appear in the blockchain. So this concern that we had, that we wanted to reduce the potential growth of the blockchain at that time, doesn't apply as much anymore because blocks are full already. And they're full in the witness section, which makes bigger blocks than output scripts. And this concern that that we need only a very small amount on the outputs, and we can enforce that at the mempool policy level has been a little bit weakened because there's no product like Slipstream, and people are just going to give their transaction to Marathon or to F2 pool or other mining pools, and they'll appear in blocks. And now what happened earlier this year, before this change got discussed, was that someone noticed there is some cryptographic protocol developers that are trying to build stuff like BitVM and so forth. And they want to put a tiny little bit more data on the blockchain than 80 bytes. And they came up, well, we want standard transactions. We want them to be in the next block. They came up with the solution, well, clearly we'll put 80 bytes into an op return, and then we'll put 2 payment outputs to put 34 bytes in each of them. And that way we have our 146, what is it? 140.
I think it was 144 because it's not all.
Yeah, 144 bytes of data. And bam, we have a standard transaction that will get mined in every block by any miner because it'll be considered legit per the mempool policy rules. And we have our solution. And now we're not really involved in that project at all. We're also not paid off by Citria, or like, it's literally just that we see, wait a minute. So op return doesn't really help at reducing the data that is being put in the blockchain anymore. Op return is not protecting us against the blockchain growing faster anymore. And it's actually creating an disincentive here to do the right thing, where we would like people to use op return, which is the least harmful way of putting data in the blockchain. And instead, people are encouraged to put them into payment outputs that have to live in the UTXO set forever. The UTXO set being the minimal set of data that every full node needs to keep around in order to be able to validate a transaction, right? So if people are designing cryptographic protocols that are gonna presumably, if they are adopted or interesting to broader population parts, they should design them in a way that is less harmful. That's our offer to these protocol developers, is like, hey, if you're gonna put data in the blockchain, please use op return rather than writing into the UTXO set. And that's basically the entire story. Is if people are going to write data in the blockchain, they're probably going to do inscriptions. They're a quarter as expensive. If people are not going to write data in the blockchain, great. And if people are going to do something like stamps, we can't really prevent it because writing payment outputs are standard. But at least that has an overhead because those chunks that are being written are very small. You have to make a new output for each of those chunks. Hopefully, whoever can and wants will instead write to op return outputs, which are less harmful. They're not in the UTXO set. And by making them a tiny little bit cheaper than nonsense stuff like writing to payment outputs, hopefully that only that use case where people would otherwise consider writing to payment outputs instead is incentivized to use op return. And that's very, very compatible with the design goals of people in 2014 that wanted to encourage people that do something that can't be prevented, inherently cannot be prevented, which is writing a little bit of data in the blockchain, to do it in a less harmful way. So that was the discussion that happened on the mailing list within the first 2 weeks of this incentive misalignment being discovered. And then within an hour or so of the pull request to make that change in mempool policy on the development branch of the Bitcoin Core repository, months away from anything being deployed, people started making podcasts and prophesying the end of the world of Bitcoin as we know it. And yeah, that caught us a little off guard. Surely, mempool policy changes tend to involve people getting interested and asking questions, but the immediate step up of 1 hour long podcasts that started with saying that we must have been paid off and there's absolutely no logical explanation why that would ever make any sense and so forth. Yeah, we could have anticipated better that opening a pull request by someone that is not actively working on Bitcoin Core most of the time. Well, okay, sorry. Let me take a step back here. The pull request was open.
Peter Todd's name's about to come up, I think.
Well,
Indeed.
Before we get to that, Murch, I agree with most of what you're saying. That you would rather have data in op return than in a fake pub key, a la stamps and all these other protocols, because they bloat the UTXO set, and you want to minimize the UTXO set if you can. Totally agree with that. But I think the thing that a lot of people objected to, at least at the beginning and certainly now, is that instead of going from 80 to 160, which would have definitely satisfied the Citria use case, at least the first pull request took out the option altogether, right? There's no data carrier size option at all. There's no way to set that. That option isn't even available. And of course, that got rescinded, and InstaGibs made another pull request that set the default to 100,000. But like, I really don't think people would have objected very much if it went to 160 or even 256 or something like that. The big thing that people were really kind of confused about is, why do you need to take it to 100K, right? Or essentially put no limit at all as a default, or even like before that, just like deleting the option altogether. That's really the big question I think a lot of people didn't really get. Could you explain like the reasoning behind putting it? Well, first, like we're like getting rid of it and then like taking it back and then making it deprecated and having it 100,000. Like what was the sort of reasoning and process for saying, hey, let's keep it at 100,000. So, for this and this reason. I think that's the part that this audience would like to know.
Yeah, fair question. So, I think we will get to something Tone earlier said already in a moment, but what we had been seeing with Slipstream and some other mining pools was that we were seeing a bunch of transactions already in the blockchain that were ignoring the up return limit. They had never been seen in the mempool. They appeared only directly in blocks. Some of them paid multiple of the current available fee rates on the open mempool. And this actually prompted a much bigger concern for Bitcoin protocol developers, because the one thing that we afford ourselves with Bitcoin is censorship resistance. This is one of the core tenets of why Bitcoin is interesting in the first place. And censorship resistance in Bitcoin is predicated on someone being able to stand up as a mining operation somewhere and starting to include the transactions that others are not including. If, say, the US government forbade a certain taproot transactions, whatever. And then someone in China could say, well, that doesn't apply here. We're going to mine them, and they're paying more fees. So absolutely, we're going to include them. This sort of option for Bitcoin transactions to be collected by miners and for people to set up their own mining operation if they can't get their transaction in is predicated on people being able to compete on the open market for mining. And the main concern that we see with private mempool things like Slipstream is if this becomes the only way of getting some very high value transactions into the blockchain, it will give the services that operate private mempools and access like this a financial advantage. Now, I think it's pretty common knowledge that mining is a cutthroat business with a very small margin. You have huge upfront investments. You have to pay for electricity. You don't get the electricity back if you don't find a block. And we are, in the long term, anticipating that transaction fees are going to do a lot more of the heavy lifting of paying for the global hash rate. So if the modus operandi of mining pools being funded through extra fees that they collect through their private mempools becomes the main way of how people are more financially advantageous, how mining operations can succeed better in the market, we have a huge mining centralization push here, which is if you are going to submit your transaction, you're going to submit it to maybe the top 3, maybe the top 5 mining pools that have these private mempools, and whoever includes it first gets the money. You're certainly not going to get your transaction to every single home miner that is building his own template via Datum or Stratum v2. And so these little operations, these little mining operations that are important for censorship resistance, they are going to be financially disincentivized further than they are already by not having the scale of operation. They are also not going to get access to some of the juiciest transactions. So when we started seeing that some of the mempool policies that had long been established were being undermined by mining operations, pun intended, then that is more scary to us than the occasional transaction overpaying a lot for block space.
Okay, so what you described is the operation of a private mempool, and basically the idea that if you have a private mempool, then those mining operations that use a private mempool have a financial advantage, therefore a long-term advantage over the small miners that are mining at home that don't see those because they're essentially private. I'm not entirely sure how that relates to censorship resistance. Like that part you brought up earlier. So that's something that I want to discuss a little bit. But before we get to that, in a private mempool, you can essentially have anything that is consensus legal, right? So you can have 4 megabyte inscription, for example, which is not standard, and no small miner is going to hear about it. And it's doubtful that we're ever going to make that standard because it would, I don't know, maybe you would, but it would be very difficult to
I
make.
have opinions on that, yeah.
Yeah, that would be very difficult to make a node like undedosable and have lots of 4 megabyte transactions or something like that.
The biggest problem with big transactions actually is that it makes it very difficult to find an optimal block template. Because if a large chunk of the block is immediately filled with one transaction, you need basically a conditional exploration of the rest of how you fill the block. Right. And now it becomes a computational problem.
Yeah, it's an NP-complete problem for sure.
Exactly.
I think it's I believe like a packing problem or something like that.
Correct.
But
but
like what we were saying is, in a private mempool, you can have essentially anything consensus legal. You can have one sat per one sat outputs, for example. You can have 4 megabyte inscriptions or whatever, and those are never going to be standard. So why this one? Because I don't see the private mempool advantage ever really disappearing, because there's always going to be a gap between what's standard and what's consensus. And in that gap, people can always create transactions that the private like these large mining pools that are very centralized right now, that we all will agree it's not a great situation, that they're always going to have that advantage. So why this one? Because in particular with op return, at least in the data that I've examined, there actually weren't very many greater than 80 byte transactions, right? It was on the order of like 100 per quarter or 100 per 10,000 blocks or something like that. It really wasn't much. And it was almost all entirely through Ben Carman's like embedding thing. And and it was only really 2 mining pools that were mining it, Mara and F2 pool. So like that seemed to me like a very strange one to make this argument on, because there are lots of other ones where mining pools make way more money, right? Like the 4 megabyte, Trump, JPEG or whatever when he won or something like that, which we presume like they paid a significant amount of money for. And like those things seem like way more like relevant than op return, which relatively speaking doesn't have very much going forward. So yeah, I like, help me understand why this argument is being brought up with this particular issue. And like, even though they're like, that's not really solved in any reasonable way for a small miner versus big miner, because that's an advantage that big miners just kind of naturally have, as long as there's a gap between standardness and consensus.
Right. Why exactly this mempool policy? Yeah. So you mentioned a few other examples. You mentioned the dust limit. You mentioned oversized transactions. The op return limit was considered before already as one of the only last mempool policies that sort of were paternalistic and trying to nudge users into certain behaviors that protocol developers considered better in the past. And the other 2 rules that you specifically mentioned just now, oversized transactions, introduce a whole new category of DOS problem on people trying to build block templates. So this has a negative externality that is very obvious. And the dust limit allows people, if the dust limit were no longer enforced, it would make it drastically cheaper to write to the UTXO set, which is another network resource that we would like to protect. So, I mean, there's been a lot of talk about how consensus should be equal to mempool policies lately, and this is not at all a position that I see Bitcoin Core take whatsoever. This is a misunderstanding and maybe an overcorrection to what we've been trying to explain for the last few years. And what we do want is, we want to not have rules where the upsides have been vanishing and the downsides are becoming present. In this case specifically, I think the upside of protecting against large op returns is negligible when inscriptions with up to 400 kilobytes are standard and generally used all the time. It is more expensive to write. It is as expensive to write 100 kilobytes to op return as writing 400 kilobytes to inscriptions. So there's just no economic incentive for people to use it this way. So the protocol development, if we're like taking a sober look at the whole big picture, not trying to make value judgments at what sort of transactions we like better or not, perspective at this, op return is just less attractive for this use case than inscriptions. And the tooling for inscriptions has been built out by the people doing this to a degree where it's super easy. Yes, it's the bytes are not touching, it's not contiguous data or whatever, but effectively the options to put data into inscriptions are present and as simpler than putting stuff into op return right now, because people haven't built tooling for putting stuff into op return. So we're seeing that the reasons for why we had the data carrier size limit they seem to be going down. We're seeing bigger transactions in some mempools. Yes, not a lot yet, but basically it's sort of weakly enforced. And I guess what we saw a little bit with the mempool full RBF discussion from a few years ago, where we had been pushing back more on it for several years, until the network basically introduced the reality by Libre Relay nodes and others starting to run with a mempool full RBF policy, where it started affecting block relay before we changed it in Bitcoin Core. And then due to the 2-a-year releases schedule, we sort of were on the back foot with the changed network reality. And I think here we saw an opportunity where we recognized the trend, and we felt that the benefits of this mempool policy were diminishing, and the cost was starting to overweigh, and we preempted it. Now, second guessing and hindsight is 2020. Should we have messaged about it and I explained it before that pull request happened? Yes, that would have been great. Again, as I said, the pull request was opened by someone that isn't even one of the regular contributors to Bitcoin Core at this point. It just it was directly out of a very benign 2-week debate on the mailing list, where essentially everybody was convinced by the arguments that were brought. A pull request was opened that, by the way, had been basically verbatim rejected 2 years prior. And people were like, yeah, actually, these arguments are convincing. We should probably do this. A bunch of people, then it blew out of proportion.
Well, so
sorry, Jimmy, did that answer your question properly?
Well, so I'm trying to understand what you're trying to say. I think if I'm understanding correctly, part of it is that you want mempool policy to more reflect what miners are actually mining, like to a large degree, so that there isn't this private mempool effect. You're essentially removing some of the incentive for them to run a private mempool because they can just get it straight from the P2P network.
Exactly.
I get that. Okay. So this is a question.
Or may I very briefly? Yes, we absolutely want to remove the financial incentive for private mempools. That is a design goal.
Okay, all right. So and you mentioned full RBF, how Libre Relay essentially created a little bit of a private mempool market in that instance, or something similar to it, and that essentially
that was very grassroots, right? It was some node runners that just adopted this mempool policy and said, this is how we always perceived this to be sort of a lower energy status that things would eventually fall to. It had been discussed a few times, but it wasn't really happening on the network. And we did like the gentleman's agreement that we operated on before, where people were like, well, if they say it should be replaceable, then we act on it, and if they don't, we don't. But with this grassroots movement of people just making it the network reality, we were caught a little on the back foot. Yeah.
Okay, so this is a question that I asked Peter Todd in Lugano, which was that we're seeing now some one-sat outputs that miners are mining, right? And these I suspect that they're paying a little more, either explicitly through fees or through side channels or something like that. But whatever the case is, if that becomes more like, and I asked Peter Todd specifically, if that starts happening, would you include it in Libre Relay? And he said, yes, I would. I would include. Yeah. I would start transferring these, and in which case that would be something like what you were saying about RBF, where there's like a grassroots movement for.
Let me stop you there. I would like to jump in.
Okay.
No. I think that there is a different effect here. With the mempool full RBF, you inherently cannot prevent that someone mines a different transaction that is juicier that is also available, right? So the ultimate resting spot of that equilibrium trends to full replacement, right? In the case of the dust limit, very specifically, the amount of money that people are saving by not having a dust output is very limited. It's limited to what they would be paying for the output in the first place. So if they're overpaying for getting that transaction in, because it's non-standard now and they have to find a specific miner and so on, I hope that the trade-offs are not attractive enough to force this into existence. I think the low amount outputs are actually detrimental. It makes it way cheaper to write to the UTXO set. If we look at that transaction from a few weeks ago where someone made that dancing Pepe GIF on the blockchain, I believe it was 1,859 pay-to-witness script hash outputs. Yeah, they paid for all of these little outputs. If up return had been an option for them, and probably it's not because they get off on writing to the UTXO set, it would have been about 1/4 cheaper. Sorry, 1 second. So sorry, not alone.
It would have been 1/4 cheaper to.
Yeah, it would have been roughly 1/4 cheaper just from the block space amount. And again, this is sort of neutral for everyone else because they pay for the block space they use. So if they use more block space, they pay for more of it. They also push out other data to that extent. But if they use less block space, they use less of it. And specifically with up return, this would not have been written to the UTXO set, but to up return. And then on top of that, they had to include 330 sats on every single one of those outputs that were unspendable. And this actually increased the cost for this misuse by a factor of 8, right? So I'm a very big fan of the dust limit. I would consider it bad if it were undermined. I would encourage miners not to include transactions that are there. And I hope that this very marginal, like if fees go up again and transactions cost 10 sats per VByte or something, and this cost would come down, of course, compared to like it's hard to predict how exactly this will work out, but my hope is that we can retain some mempool policies, because mempool policies that protect network resources are actually mempool policies that we do want to keep and that are useful and sensible. And the dust limit very much is one of those. Whereas the up return limit, as I said, I feel like it was having a marginal benefit at this point. So maybe to jump back a couple, you asked why not 160? Why drop it or make the default big enough?
I want to comment on that as well. So go ahead. No, go ahead first.
Oh, okay. So basically, what we anticipated was, well, we're going to increase it to 160, and then this specific use case that demonstrated the malincentive would be satisfied. And I'm in hindsight, probably this would have been a better organic way of rolling it out, would have been to go step by step and increase it as we see people react to it. But again, I think people also were a bunch of time had gone into the whole mempool full RBF debate and going back and forth 3 times. People didn't feel like, well, here we very clearly can see where this goes in the long-term trend. If we increase it to 160 now, someone will invent something that needs 256 bytes next year, and then someone's going to invent something that uses 1,000 and so forth. Given that its benefit was fading, why not just set it by default to obsolete? And I don't know, if you read the discussions, I hope you'd find that argument more compelling. But if you don't, please lay it on me.
So I want to comment on that real quick, and then we do have to switch topics. We are
Well, I have a couple more questions though.
I know.
Okay.
All right. Hopefully, we'll still have time for everything. We are starting like some of the people watching us are starting to tune out a little bit, but these are also the same people that are screaming, core bad, get rid of core, and you are the person that needs to listen to this, because you need to understand why core released version 30 the way they did. And if you're not willing to listen to a core developer explain it in the most basic way possible, and especially if you're still not able to understand why they did what they did, because it still sounds too complicated, then you should have no opinion on the debate whether it should be version core version 30 or not, right? But everyone has an opinion. So this is why these videos are so important. I want to comment on the 160 bytes, increasing it to 160 bytes. And the way you phrased it, Jimmy, it was, well, why not just do 160 bytes? And then the company Symbiont, that apparently had a use case.
Citria.
Yeah, sorry. Symbiont was a whole other, no, I remember what that was. Citria, sorry. They would have been satisfied. Had that happened, I think Bitcoin Core would have been accused of catering to this one company even more so than they are right now. And then, and as Murch said, what if there is another company further down the line? Now they're going to be accused that there is another company. So I personally think raising it that little would have created more hate at core, just to satisfy one specific use case. Murch,
I really don't think it would have blown up this much if it had been that, and I don't think anyone would have even thought about Citria or whatever. We're increasing it a little bit so people don't use it into a UTXO.
But Jimmy, let me ask you:
yeah. Mm-hmm.
If we had increased it to 1,000 with the background of people being angry about inscriptions for the past 2 years, very vehemently already, I think that people are like, why are you making room for more arbitrary data? Sure, maybe not quite to the same magnitude, but this is exactly like this. Why are you catering to this in the first place is, I think, a big part of why people are.
Well, I think your explanation earlier was perfectly reasonable, right? You want to reduce the UTXO set. I don't think there's anybody in the world that's like, you know what? If there's a way to reduce the UTXO set, that's a very reasonable thing to do to increase a very prunable part of running a node. Even the witness, like you said, is prunable, and that's one of the reasons why you give it a discount, is that you don't have to keep it around because the signature is around everything other than the witness. So that makes it a lot easier.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
Give me 1 sec,
okay.
please. I'm having a heat issue here.
Okay.
All right. Well,
earlier in the show, Toby,
as you know, in mining operations, heat is one of the big things.
Yeah, so you're mining Bitcoin right now internally.
I'm mining Bitcoin.
That was just taking one off.
Okay. All right. So the question I have is, you were saying that most people are going to use the witness because there is a discount, and I totally understand that. It costs 1/4, right? You can put in 400 bytes in the witness for 100 bytes that you can put into op return, and so therefore they're going to use it. Except we have this very obvious use case where that's not being the case, right? Citria specifically wants it in op return, at least as far as I understand it, because they need every node to see it in an emergency or something like that.
Right. So very specifically, this cryptographic protocol relies on data being in outputs. And basically, with them being restricted to having the data in outputs and it being visible immediately and committed to by a signature at the moment it's broadcast, they only have the option in putting it into outputs. And now the question would only be, Do they put it into an up return, or do they put it into payment outputs in order to create a standard transaction? So to be very precise and clear about this, Citria never asked for us to increase the up return limit. They looked at the mempool policies, designed their protocol in a way that they would create standard transactions and said, works for us, right? So we saw what they designed and then said, well, this kind of sucks. Why are they putting data into payment outputs? And said, well, maybe this mempool policy that is not really protecting against the things for which it was introduced is starting to have a detrimental effect here. And that's why we decided to say, well, maybe this mempool policy is not useful anymore.
Yeah. So I get that. But like I said, your argument earlier was people are going to use the witness because it's cheaper, but we have specific use cases like Citria where they're having to use other things, right? And honestly, like the way you phrased it is we don't want to be biased one way or the other, or be recommending a particular type of use case for Bitcoin. And this is where I think a lot of people that are more into economics, more about monetary maximalism, maybe would be a little bit like, okay, then why that's not what we're in Bitcoin for. That's not what makes Bitcoin interesting as sort of like this, thing that lets other protocols come in and do other stuff. And that's where I guess I would like to ask, like, I've heard many developers say, like, Bitcoin is money, the monetary use case is very important, but that conflicts with what you're saying about, hey, like, we don't want to discriminate against, we as core developers don't want to encourage a particular way of using something. We don't want to be prescriptive. We like, I mean, or at least in that regard. So help me understand what like how you square those things, because I think you all want the same things, right? We want a strong monetary network, and we want censorship resistance. But I mean, can you understand what the critics are saying
totally,
about that?
Obviously.
Yeah.
So I think there's a misunderstanding here, and yes, I do not know any Bitcoin Core contributor that is involved in any of this NFT crap or interested in it particularly. Nobody is building tools for that either. What we are trying to build is the best Bitcoin network for Bitcoin, the currency. And what we're seeing right now is that we can do about 15 transactions per second on the main chain. And we want this to be the native currency of the internet. We're building a system that probably ultimately has to be able to facilitate on that layer, and especially on other layers on top of it, way more transactions. We're basically at the phase of the dial-up internet in the late 90s, where sure, you can download a 4 kilobyte picture, and now we're streaming gigabytes of movies, and that just works in every household, right? So if we're building a system where we want to facilitate the internet payments of 8 billion people on the planet in the long run, probably we have to invent a couple more cool things, how we share UTXOs, how we bootstrap trust minimal side projects or second layers or other things. And I think the design philosophy of Bitcoin at that point is it's a very dumb network that allows for creative solutions on the edge. I think Antonopoulos said something like that at a very long time ago. And that's exactly what we're trying to build. We're trying to build an unopinionated, dumb base layer that allows people to come in and come up with new ideas how to pack more economic activity into less block space. That's what SegWit was about. That's what Taproot is about, right? And that is also, I have honestly no fucking clue what Citria actually does. But The BitVM research is interesting in some ways. The ARC research is interesting in some ways. State chains, other things are interesting in the sense that if they work well and can convince us, like Lightning has convinced us about 10 years ago, yes, very much the Bitcoin protocol developers might be interested in trying to facilitate that. Talking about Bitcoin Core 30.0, for example, one of the big things that we did was push out other new mempool policies that were restrictive and introduced interfaces for the Lightning Network to build on. The major Lightning implementations this year are, or probably next year, are starting to roll out zero-fee commitment transactions, which means that something that has affected a lot of Lightning users, where nodes would just close channels because they disagreed on fee estimation, will just stop happening, right? We are trying to build the infrastructure to have a more global payment system for Bitcoin the currency. Nobody is building shit for these NFT crap things. And if we're looking at the prices of that stuff, it's doing exactly what everybody anticipated. It's down 30x. The hype has jumped the shark. Sure, maybe someone comes up with some new scheme where now a little bit of data is written into an op return, and that's the new thing. There's runes already, obviously, which, by the way, even if you're not interested in colored coins and other tokens on top of Bitcoin, is just a much, much, much less harmful design than BRC20, which is the worst. So, yeah, I mean, sure, people are going to use these capabilities to be creative. Some of that might not be exactly what you want, but maybe some of that is going to be super cool, and everybody's going to use it in 10 years to do their instant trustless payments at a totally different scale than we can currently facilitate with Lightning. And it is just really hard to say what people might invent if you don't know what they're going to invent in the future, and then to be super restrictive at this point in time in the Bitcoin protocol evolution, and to cut off all these potential ways how people could evolve Bitcoin to make it way more useful for all of us. Does that work for you?
Yeah, I get your perspective, and it is it's not uncommon among developers, right? Because they do like to build things. I will push back a little bit though. Not having a solid base, where a base that's constantly sort of like changing a little bit here, a little bit there, and stuff like that. That actually makes app developers lazier, or take them longer to actually make the application, because they're usually waiting for that next upgrade, right? Like, so for example, we know that Schnorr signatures were introduced in Taproot, and that makes Lightning channels a lot more efficient. You can do 2 of 2 MUSIG instead of 2 of 2 ECDSA signatures, and so on, which means that the Lightning protocol is having to upgrade each time that you release something like this, right? So Taproot channels are something that people have to create. You can't, and now you have multiple things, and so on. So I understand what you're saying, and I get that to a large degree, but I will push back just a little bit, saying that sometimes like leaving things too open can actually slow down development rather than increase it sometimes.
I'm sorry, but I have to push back heavily. I think that Bitcoin development has been criticized about 20 times more for being way too conservative and too slow. So the idea that one soft fork in 2017 and one soft fork in 2021 that both introduced a number of very future-looking, well-designed upgrade hooks is so fast that app developers are gonna wait for us to solve their problems at the base layer. I think that characterization just doesn't work for me.
No. It's that I mean, for example, there are people that have considered writing like a book on Lightning, but you make it all based on like 2017, and then 2021 comes along, and by 2019 that this is getting going. Well, then are you going to write that book, or are you going to wait until the 2021 fork happens and then you go write the book? But then something else comes along later. It's a way in which, if it's not solid enough, it makes it more difficult to like go and do. Or if you know that it's going to upgrade soon, then maybe you just hold off on development until that new thing releases, and then you can go do it, right? Like this is apparently very common in like game studios where new generations of consoles come out. They're like, okay, well, maybe we should just wait for the Switch 2 or the PS5 to go and develop this game instead of doing it. But like sometimes it slows it down, and I don't think that's an unreasonable thing to say when you have something on the horizon, however quick or slow that development.
Okay.
Before you answer, Jimmy, excellent question. Speaking like a true author, and Murch, begin your answer with, life is about priorities.
Okay, life is about priorities, but I would say that putting this change of a mempool policy in a similar category as SegWit and Taproot just feels like a
I'm not
error. Mm-hmm. And then second, I think that obviously Lightning is more of a 2-decade project and is bound to evolve, especially at the early few years of when it was rolling out. So if you are writing a Lightning book in 2017, and then obviously it's going to be very different in 2019, that is stuff that is happening in the Lightning development. Hardly anything changed at the Bitcoin protocol level that heavily influenced Lightning at this point. Yes, the Taproot soft fork appearing on the horizon probably changed the question of when to do some of the channel upgrade stuff, because the PTLCs and Taproot channels are attractive for some of the Lightning developers. But I mean, it's been 4 years. They haven't even upgraded to that yet. So saying that they waited for the on-chain protocol change and we're building their roadmap around that just doesn't feel like that convincing to me.
All right. I think Tone wants to move on, so that's.
I do want to move on.
Maybe I'll have you on my show at some point, and we could like talk this.
Sure. I mean, also, I do hear a lot. I didn't mention this in my intro earlier. I've been working very heavily with the Bitcoin Uptake group for many years. For the last 3 years, we've been putting out a podcast every Tuesday to go over the newsletter and discuss it, and so I do hear about like the big picture Lightning changes. I used to be following everything in 2017, but Lightning's pretty big now. It's getting more mature too. But the developments are in Lightning mostly. There's been small changes like the recent one child, one parent package relay stuff, the anchor stuff that's useful for Lightning, but those are very small things that have happened on chain, and even only at the relay layer, not even in consensus. So sorry to round it out.
Let's let Tone ask the next question so we can move on.
Yeah, go ahead.
Moving on to another topic. I think we just spent an hour trying to explain it's hard for me to say reasoning behind core, because Murch does not speak for core. And that is going to be another topic we're going to maybe move on to next, because it's not the best transition. But right before I do that, at a major risk of looking like a shill, I'm going to do a screen share. And I mean, people can pause the video, right? So it's not like I can show it for a second. This was a message that used more than 80 bytes in an op return. It's a friend of mine that has a business in the Bitcoin security space. And he just decided to, hey, why don't I spend a little bit of money and advertise my business right in the Bitcoin blockchain? And there was a big side of Bitcoiners that will say this is spam, but then you also
could you scroll to the block time? I would like to know when this was published.
Yeah, I'm sure it was recent or post v30.
I mean,
903.
No, this is from January 30th. This was way before we
June
even
30th.
had any
Okay.
notes. Just to be clear,
that was probably a Libre relay then.
Yeah, it would have been a Libre
or Slipstream. Just to be very clear here, this is not enabled by Bitcoin v30.
But it can be now, right? But it doesn't. Yeah, so that's another example of here is a transaction that had more than 80 bytes of data in the app return. They had to. This probably would have been a little bit cheaper today with version 30 than sending it through Slipstream.
Scroll up so we can see the fee.
Show us the block it, and so we can see what the fee rate comparison is. It overpaid 3x. There. Okay. What is that? Again.
Overpaid 8x. 8x.
There you go. They paid a private mempool to include a transaction.
Or it was probably like Ben Carmen's thing, because that usually does a multiple of the of the medium block fee.
But Tone, what you're demonstrating is that these transactions could make it in when people had demand for them and paid for it. And that's basically the argument why we're saying the value of this mempool policy is diminishing. You're exactly making my point.
No, that's fine. But I'm trying to get to another point. There's a couple of points to be made with this transaction. And Paulto, you're welcome for the unsolicited advertising, but because just the only one that I had handy from my discussion with him on the situation about a month ago. And my point is, some people will see this as spam, but then you also have to say that Satoshi publishing the famous, the Times of London quote, Chandler on brink of second bailout for banks, is also spam, right? So why do some people get to decide what is spam and what isn't spam? And as I've heard you mention before, not on this podcast, but on another podcast, if Bitcoin can't compete with spam for financial transactions, then Bitcoin is already dead. You want to elaborate on that a little bit?
Sure. So I'm interested in Bitcoin as money, as a currency. I don't find this whole NFT and other data publishing that interesting. I think it's interesting in the sense of something like open timestamps, where you have a little bit of data that anchors to prove the existence of something that can be very valuable for a number of other things that are unrelated to Bitcoin. But generally what I see is, from a selfish perspective, if I want to make a transaction, I want others to forward my transactions, so I'm going to forward their transactions too. And all other people's payments that don't affect me look just as arbitrary to me as other things they might do with the block space. So I appreciate that people feel like, well, Bitcoin is for money. But if you're not able to outcompete someone buying block space to put an ad into the Bitcoin blockchain, then I'm afraid that your use case for using Bitcoin as a money is not particularly valuable. And especially if we look at the mempool right now, I did a couple transactions this week at 0.3 sats per vbyte. They went through in the next block and an hour later. And you can't tell me that if people are using Bitcoin so little that I'm paying 44 sats for a payment to my buddy, that the sky is falling because the spam is eating all the block space. That just doesn't work for me.
Well, then if you are saying that, let's get back to the example that I gave earlier. 1 sat outputs, right? Like, if you're saying, well, if it can't compete, then like we should just kind of throw up our hands. Well, then wouldn't you want the 1 sat per 1 sat outputs to also fill in the block space? Like if nothing is competing against it, if they're getting into blocks, then by definition they're also like paying enough fees, and you should be able to outcompete them. Like where does that logic end, and why do you make the exception for 1 sat outputs?
I did not make an exception for 1 sat outputs. I very specifically made an exception for op return, which I thought the mempool policy was not as useful as it used to be. I described the dust limit specifically as a mempool policy that protects the node network resources. Sorry.
Yeah, that's what I meant. I meant exception the other way. Like basically, why are you blocking those and not the others?
Well, because they're harmful.
Okay, but isn't like spam also harmful? Like
not really.
No. I mean, 546 or 1, like either way, they're probably not going to move, or if they do, then they're going to pay similar amount of fees.
Very specifically, most of the new UTXOs that were created with the BRC20 bullshit are spendable, and we know for a fact that the people that created tokens with these BRC20 transactions, they spend it to an output that determines the key that owns the colored coin they created, the BRC20. So very specifically, we know for a fact that anyone that's still interested in their dumb BRC20 token also has the key to spend these small outputs they created in order to indicate who owns their BRC20. So they could clean up these UTXOs right now. And if any of them are listening, please clean up your fucking UTXOs admins. You can currently spend a pay to taproot input for 6 sats at 0.1 sat per vbyte. Well, more realistically, 0.3 or so gets in very often during the day. So it's 18 sats. You're getting 312 sats back by spending that. Yes, I think it's obviously a very small financial incentive right now. It's like 30 cents or whatever. But if you're sitting on thousands of these, especially if Bitcoin exchange rate continues to go up, these will be cleaned up, hopefully, most of them. And writing data to payment outputs where you use the hash as a data carrier, they will never get cleaned up. And the context in which people are using these 1 sat outputs to create transactions, there's 2 of them. One is counterparty / stamps, which I consider outright detrimental. Why do you have to store your friggin' art in the UTXO set? It's just trolling. They pay a significant premium for that though, and this is what I would like to continue pushing back on. The other use case is anchor outputs, where they are very deliberately creating a connector or an anchor that will be spent almost immediately, and it's easier to account for that by having a smaller amount in these outputs. And here my message would be, suck it up, Buttercup. If you're getting back your money immediately, you can also go over the standard limit. So currently, I just do not see a use case for these small amounts that I would support at all. And I see a big detriment for it getting cheaper. So I would hope that all miners continue to enforce the dust limit. And if people do use all of the fees that they would have to spend into creating those the amount of the outputs where they add data, and instead drop it to fees, I'm afraid that these transactions will be attractive, and some miners acting rationally and maximizing their revenue might include them. But my argument would be none of us should actively help bring this about, because it's not good for the network. And that's the difference here. I think this one is actually detrimental. Op return, you asked me if spam is actually detrimental. I don't know. I mean, op return actually makes blocks smaller compared to inscriptions. It's competing for block space that is currently not fully demanded, but at basically they're sucking up the rest of the block space that is currently not demanded. I ran some statistics a couple months ago. It was taking about a quarter of the block space and paying a 20th of all fees. So it's like 5x less than people are paying for their payments. And honestly, right now, if anyone wants to make Bitcoin payments on chain, they can do so at 1 sat per vbyte in the next block. So if you want this stuff not to happen, buy the block space, do something better with it, do some UTXO management, open some channels, close some channels, whatever. There's it's really cheap to do.
I want to comment real quick.
Sorry.
Like a lot of people in our chat are like just spewing things like, Core just sold out to the spammers. They gave up the fight. And my comment on it is, I see it differently. I see it as the Core. Again, there is no such thing as Core. Just a bunch of people. There's a decentralized entity. They see it as they're not scared of spam in op return. And because they're not scared of it, and no one should be scared of it, and people that are having this visceral reaction, you are basically scared of spam. I'm gonna in our next show, I'm gonna play that famous Allen Iverson clip of him at a podium saying, we're talking about practice. So we're talking about spam. And core developers and a lot of people, myself included, I'm not scared of spam anymore.
Well, but Tone, there are different kinds of spam. There's op return spam, and we are clearly scared of UTXO spam, right? Like if you're just polluting the UTXO set. So I don't think you can just say like, oh, you're just scared of spam. It's a particular type of spam, and there are different levels to spamming and different ways in which these things like affect running of a node and so on. So I don't think you could just say, all right, you're scared of spam.
So this transition.
All right, how about we double down on the definition? What is spam?
Right. So I think it's anything that's non-monetary, and I believe it includes stuff like op return. Obviously, UTXOs. Some spam is more harmful than others, but any non-monetary transaction is spam. That's
very specifically, you personally and selfishly. What is the difference between someone making an ad like Tone's friend and someone sending money from Alice to Bob and you don't even know who these are? How does this affect you personally differently in the Bitcoin network?
Well, first of all, I'm running a node, so it uses more resources if the spam gets through. All the monetary transactions I want through. Stuff like an ad is almost by definition spam, right? Like you don't want to see an ad while you're reading a web page. You don't want to see an ad in your inbox, at least the ones that you're not soliciting. So I mean, that's almost by definition spam. So I never really don't think that's
returns on transactions. So I don't see that.
Huh?
I don't see that ad. I don't read the op returns on every transaction. That is not a thing Bitcoin facilitates. This is something that other apps around Bitcoin facilitate. I'm not reading those. I'm not getting that ad.
I mean, but it's filling up your. I don't read every spam email that comes into my inbox either. But it does sort of fill up my inbox, right? Like
okay, let's double click on how does it increase the resources of your node. When someone sends an op return message.
Okay. Well, so first of all, if it doesn't get into a block, then not having processed it or sending it out to other nodes, that decreases the bandwidth, at least at a minimum, it decreases the upload bandwidth, which is oftentimes the highest, or that's more expensive than download bandwidth on almost every internet connection, right? So that's a resource. You also have to validate those transactions, keep it in your mempool and so on if you receive them. So those are actual costs to my hardware, depending on how robust my hardware might be. But I mean, like it's still a cost, right? And if it does make it into a block, then that's also hard drive storage. That's validation again if I haven't seen it. That's downloading it again if I didn't see it before, and so on. So there's at least those costs, and that's stuff that
Okay.
I would rather not have, right? So
Sure,
there's
I
that.
agree. All of those are costs. They're minuscule compared to the cost of you deciding to run a node in the first place. You're probably allowing some several hundred gigabytes of network traffic per month. You're probably more than willing to help other nodes bootstrap from the network, providing your whole blockchain. You're sending low fee rate transactions that might never make it in, that sit around in the mempool for months. I mean, what I'm trying, I'm not trying to put you on the spot and grill you or anything, but what I'm trying to point out from your personal selfish perspective and your node, the difference between something facilitating a lightning closure or a BitVM thing that might settle 10,000 payments out of band, or someone else, Alice and Bob, making a payment, I think that the difference is mostly feels. And
no, well, you might say feels, or you can say principle. Like if you're making a utilitarian argument of, okay, you should only care about it if the cost to you is above a certain amount. Well, I mean that would assume sort of like a utilitarian morality from me, right? If I in principle don't want the Bitcoin network to get more non-monetary, then restricting those is something that's in my interest from a moral and principled perspective, and not feels, right? Like emotionally, it might also feel great, but sticking to my principles is actually worthwhile. And not saying like, oh, well, it's only going to cost you a little bit more. Yeah. All the upload bandwidth. I mean, to be fair, what you're saying is absolutely correct. It's actually very little compared to that. But on a principled basis, right? If I don't I don't have to enable spam. And in fact, this was the argument given way back in the days of Satoshi Dice, when they were putting out 1-sat outputs, right? All these people were gambling on Satoshi Dice with 1-sat outputs using their stuff. And that's what led to actually one of the earliest filters, which was, let's have a minimum amount on outputs so that we don't enable this kind of very abusive usage of Bitcoin. I agree with that, right? Like I think that's something that every node runner should do is discriminate and stand on principle, not necessarily like, okay, here's what's economically most rational for you. I think most Bitcoiners have a much longer term view of, hey, here's what we want Bitcoin to be 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years from now. And this is how I am going to contribute to making Bitcoin in that manner. And I think they're right. That's why they're running a node. It's their node. And I think that's what they should do too.
I think we're so close. We're extremely close here. I agree with the principled stance. I mean, I want Bitcoin to be used for money. I have zero interest. I've never owned an NFT, nor do I care to. I have done a couple of up returns, I think, but
that's for testing. You're a developer.
I mean, yeah. I bought that block space. I'm going to use it the way I want. So, but I do appreciate that all of this discussion and so forth shapes how we think about Bitcoin and what we want on Bitcoin, and it absolutely helps with people with the making people care less about NFTs on Bitcoin, because we as a general community have been pretty hostile to it and told them to go away. I think that helps with reducing the price and demand for this stuff. So I'm not saying that the vibes and feels and moral principled stance of this is not something I'm interested in or want to facilitate. I think that has a place. And to a degree, that's exactly the same thing we Bitcoin Core developers are doing. We're not building tools for this. We're not building our mempool policy around trying to facilitate this or make it better or whatever. We're looking at how is the network going to perform the best for Bitcoin, the currency. And we're designing for mining to be as fair as possible, so that the people that want to mine at home, build their own block templates, don't have a massive financial disadvantage. Those are the things that we also take into account. We take a very principled stance to developing the protocol rules for those of us involved in Bitcoin protocol development. The first of which is probably don't fuck with people's money, right? Which, for example, I see BIP444 just completely walk over. It's insane to me. And so, yeah, there's a principled stance here. There's slight differences in what principles exactly we're applying. And absolutely, I want Bitcoin to be used for money. But I just, honestly, a few people drawing Abraham Lincoln Vampire Slayer on a 20, and that then being flooded so hard that nobody really wants these anymore, and they're 30x down. That is exactly the outcome that I expect. People are gonna do funny shit because they can. They do it even more because we're so upset about it, and then it runs its course because it's really not useful nor valuable enough to compete with Bitcoin as a money.
Well, so you earlier said that a lot of these op returns are getting in non-demanded block space. I mean, but at the same time, you're against, for example, one-sat outputs. Can't you make the same argument for one-sat outputs? It's non-demanded block space, and like if they could, they would reduce the outputs to one and maybe create more of these UTXOs that get spent right away in sort of like the colored coins ish protocols that they use. Like I want to understand where you draw the line here, right? Like, because sometimes you're okay with non-demanded block space being used, for example, with op return. Other times you're not okay with that if it's going to harm something, whether it's a UTXO set or whatever. What's the principle that you have? Where's your principled stance that says at this line and no further, right? Like here's where I say.
Already. Basically, the mempool policies that protect network resources, they do make sense to me. And the dust limit very much is one of those for me. I personally think that the harm being done by op returns and inscriptions has been heavily inflated. I think it's dumb. I don't really care about it, but it's paid a lot of fees and competed for block space, and it's very clearly something that a big portion of the people that buy block space want to do, and it would require us to stamp it out. Pun not intended, would require us to fuck with people's money at this point. And that is, I think, something that a lot of Bitcoin protocol developers do not wish to do. And yeah, so the dust limit very specifically protects a network resource, which is the UTXO set. And that is a mempool policy that I think is valuable. The op return limit, being it that block space has basically been fully demanded for several years. Right now it's, I don't know, in the 95 plus range or more. Op returns do not grow the blockchain faster than it's growing right now. Actually, blocks full of op return would reduce the blockchain growth. Op returns don't go
assuming full blocks, right? Like if it's not full,
assuming full blocks, sure.
Yeah.
But the demand for highly replicated, unlimited storage is free. Unlimited storage is basically infinite, right? So if the price for putting something into the Bitcoin blockchain is currently slightly more than 0.1 sat per VByte, people are going to use it for something. That's sort of a given. So we're assuming that blocks are linearly, the blockchain is growing linearly at a full block per 10 minutes. Op returns don't change that. Op returns don't increase the UTXO set. Op returns don't increase the sync time because they're actually super easy computationally to validate. I don't understand what the harm specifically is that people are so concerned about, except for I only want it to be used for money, which I sympathize with. But if we're looking at Bitcoin as programmable money, any programming language will allow you to insert data. It's just if we don't give them an easy way of doing it that we begrudgingly accept, they're going to do it in different, dumber, or more harmful ways. And hopefully, overall, there's little demand for it because I think Bitcoin is money and people are going to demand it for money, and they're easily able of pricing out this dumber, less useful, less valuable behavior. And if not, honestly, Bitcoin isn't that interesting of a project. I'll probably go do something else.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think I agree with you on the point that it will get priced out eventually. I think the perception is that there's some spam and you don't want to be friendly towards it, right? And that's another whole discussion. I'll let Tone actually go on because I could see him being very
friendly to spam. I don't think we're friendly to spam.
Yeah, we may need to bring you back to for a follow-up episode in the near future. Okay, so I wanted to after we started to say that not all spam is created equal, and some spam is worse than other spam. So speaking of harmful spam, there's been a lot of things in the comments about. I want to read some specific comments.
Is it about the Coinbase transaction?
No. Sure, fine. Satoshi's comments were in the Coinbase transaction. In the next transaction, what's the difference, right?
No. So Coinbase is a very special transaction, and the miners have a right to put whatever they want in the script sig. That's, I think, the point that they want to make.
Wait. Why do miners have the right to put anything they want into the Coinbase, but in other places it's spam? Could you double click on that, please?
Yeah. So they can put it in because they're finding the proof of work based on it, right? So if they make one, then it's part of the proof of work, and it's
just to be clear. Are we talking about the extra nonce or additional space?
The extra nonce in script sig of the
sure.
Coinbase
Okay, so they have to put an extra nonce anyway. Whatever they put there is not going to change the size of the expected Coinbase. So it's
they could put extra text. I think they use it for merge mining as well, and
sure. So if they put extra data, they're going to fit fewer other things into the block because the Coinbase does contribute to the limited block space that is consumed by a block. So they're just deciding essentially to sell it at the price of the transactions that they're not putting into the blockchain instead. So how is this any different than buying block space?
Buying block space?
If they're buying block space from themselves by pushing out other transactions that they're not collecting fees on, how is this philosophically any different from buying block space to put stuff?
The philosophical difference is that it's very difficult to subvert whatever they're doing, whereas policy is a lot easier to change, right? So if you want to reject a block with a miner that creates a Coinbase transaction with a script sig that has some large contiguous block of something or other, you can, but that's going to cost you proof of work, which is very difficult. And in the meantime, they might be able to go do that. So, that's practically the difference. Is that's much harder than.
Sorry, I have a bone to pick here. You said it's harder to revert a transaction that a Coinbase transaction that includes data than some other transaction that could be dissuaded by mempool policy. But if the transactions are already being routed around the network and appear in blocks because they pay for it, you do have to revert the block, just like a Coinbase transaction.
Right. That is
what is the difference?
But it's the actual getting into the block, right?
Okay.
That process has more friction.
All right, so we're talking about the what mempool policies can achieve and not achieve. Sorry, Tone, is this the topic that you wanted to open up or not?
No, I was gonna open up. I was gonna talk about the inflation bug, but go ahead, finish your thought, and then we can discuss what are the efforts to fix the inflation bug that kind of set this whole thing into motion.
Wait, what are you talking about? The
inflation bug,
Inscription Bug.
Inscription Bug. Okay, I was gonna say
Inscription Bug.
What? Okay, but
that was back in like 2019.
On the efficacy of mempool policies, please. What we very specifically got an example for this year is that organically people started to set a lower minimum fee rate in their nodes and then peer with each other, and then convinced a couple miners to start including low fee rate transactions. And calculations show that somewhere around 8% or so of listening nodes are sufficient to completely deploy that behavior and give every single node roughly a 95% chance to have at least one of those peers that facilitate those transactions. So if we're going to talk about how mempool policies, how effective they are, and I'm on the record saying that the whole filters work, don't work is a horrible oversimplification that just doesn't help this debate at all. But what mempool policies can do is, as long as all miners enforce them, they're perfect. As long as 99.9% of the network enforce them, they are gonna slow down transactions. And what we've specifically seen with the advent of private mempool services like Slipstream and whatever else is out there is people that want to do that and are willing to pay for that are going to just use the route sender to miner that includes it and pay the miner for it. And mempool policy plays zero role of what's going to be in blocks if they go that route. So we have sort of two avenues of this new behavior establishing itself on the network. It's a few percent points of listening nodes rolling out these more lenient mempool policies, and the mempool policy is essentially undermined as soon as a few miners also start accepting stuff into the block templates. And people just routing around and putting consensus valid stuff directly into blocks by talking to miners. And so if there is a strong financial incentive and miners are including it and it's consensus valid, there's very limited things we can achieve with mempool policy. And that's a big part of what we established and found out over the summer, with the low fee rate transactions being an eminent example of how this organically happens on the network without any of the node implementations actually supporting it. Libra didn't, Bitcoin Core didn't, Bitcoin Knots didn't. All of them had the minimum fee rate of 1 sat per vbyte, and in 3 weeks, 40% of transactions were below the minimum fee rate in blocks. So I just to put out there, I think that the claim that mempool policies adopted by 20% of nodes or something do anything at all for how many of those transactions propagate on the network, I just want to push back on that. That's
I don't think anyone's made that claim. And we discussed this with Adam. There's a tolerant minority sort of effect on the network where if you have somewhere between 8 and 12% of the network supporting a particular policy, it's because it's a gossip network, everyone's going to hear about it. And therefore, it's probably going to get mined as long as it's economically rational and so on.
Yeah,
I don't think that part is.
No, you didn't make that argument. Just
no,
to be clear,
but I don't. But again, like the reason why 20% of the network is running knots is because they're not doing it so that because they think it's going to be effective at 90%. I think they're taking a principled stance. They're hoping that 95% of the network agrees with them, and if they did, then that would be great. But I think most people are realistic in knowing that, hey, until we get to that, we're just sort of like, hey, we're waving the flag over here and saying I support this, not hey, this is going to be so effective for the network and we're going to stop all this spam. It's just I don't have to deal with it. Yeah,
I'm gonna push back on that. I think half the people that are running knots have no idea it does nothing.
What do you mean it does? Well, I mean,
they actually think. I think half the people running knots nodes actually believe they are preventing spam on the blockchain.
Absolutely. I've had that conversation dozens of times in the last.
Well, maybe. I'm certainly not under that delusion. And
I think they're clueless.
I would hope that you're not under that delusion because you understand Bitcoin.
Well, so I mean, I've explained this many times. Like, there's a percolation threshold, 8 to 12%. Don't really know exactly where, but like somewhere around there, like basically 95% of the network
easily is full deployment, which means, by the way, that Bitcoin Core v30 has essentially fully deployed the new up return policy now.
Well, we don't know
Because-
how many of those people changed the data carrier size limit, so we don't know. But assuming that
I think
they
we
left
all
it at
agree
default,
that
yes.
that defaults are very sticky.
Yeah. I don't know, but assuming that it's at the default, then yeah, that would probably mean that 100. Although there's other sticking points too, and this is where like it's not going to show up until there's like software that lets you do it, right? Like there's until like it's relatively easy to go and create those, it's only going to be people like me and Murch that are like hand constructing transactions and signing them and then deploying them, that those are the people that are able to do it. Or if there's a website to do it, then you have to like know about the website, interact with the website, know how to pay the website and all that stuff. There's still significant friction to getting a lot of it in, which is why I don't think it's that prominent yet.
Yeah.
Let's get back to just briefly commenting on the inscription bug, and also, Murch, as you do that, can you also comment, because I heard you talk about it in the other podcast, that I was kind of on this like movement as well, like, hey, why does Score always have to update stuff? Why can't they just leave it alone? But you can't just leave it alone, because other stuff around Bitcoin is constantly evolving. And if you leave Bitcoin alone and don't change anything, then something bigger is eventually going to be broken. So comment on that as well.
Sorry, I got distracted.
Okay.
The inscription.
Don't read the live chat. I know, and it's I know.
Yeah, it's almost 2 hours now. So I object to the classification of inscriptions as using a bug. I think that's a silly framing, and I think it is specifically done to push people's buttons. And so yes, during the design of SegWit, people were talking about what if people put data into the witness section, and then we're like, okay, blocks can grow at most 4 megabytes per 10 minutes, the blockchain, and we can stomach that at this point. That's why we can afford ourselves this block size increase. Now, for the most part, obviously, blocks don't grow at 4 megabytes per 10 minutes because people don't use only the witness section. They actually make payments and stuff. Second, the drop of the witness size limit was a very specific design decision of Taproot that was discussed and is actually documented in the BIPs. So yes, obviously it's hard to predict how people are going to use everything, but neither of those two is classified as a bug. They are both design decisions that were made to introduce new functionality to the Bitcoin network.
Okay, so real quick, do you think that part should be changed?
No.
Okay. Well, we're not going to elaborate on that because otherwise this interview will last forever. So can you just comment on why Bitcoin developers need to constantly keep up with the code and continue making changes because of the infrastructure around Bitcoin is always changing?
Yeah, I mean, for example, recently Apple changed something in how you can sign code, and it broke Bitcoin Core on Apple. We just see hardware change, we see drivers change, we see the network reality change, we see different people using Bitcoin in different ways. We have the price increase, we have the hash rate increase. So there's just all these things around Bitcoin that change. And I think this is also not in conflict with what people that push for ossification want. So there's just this maintenance aspect, making it continue to work in a changing environment. That's changing environment is how software ages, right? If you had written a perfect piece of software, it might still not run on a computer 10 years later because the operating system had changed, the hardware architecture had changed, the drivers had changed, and so forth. Maybe the things that were in the C compiler at that time are no longer present in a newer version and so forth. So software ages by everything around it changing.
All right, Jimmy, you have something to say? Otherwise, I'm gonna. We are gonna be wrapping it up soon. I just have a couple of audience we need to get through.
All right. So,
I mean, did you want to go for another hour? We can go.
I'm not opposed to that. You mentioned that the design decision to sort of remove the limit on the witness. So previously, if I'm reading the code correctly, in policy.h, there's a max standard pay to witness script hash script size, and that's set at 3,600. And I believe that's still in place today. So if you try to make a pay to witness script hash, which is SegWit version 0, with larger than a 3,600 byte witness, then that's not standard and that's not going to get relayed, correct?
That might be right. Not
okay.
Sure.
But that limit was not put in place for pay to taproot. And that was, as you said, a design decision. Unfortunately, that means that inscriptions and stuff can be greater than 3,600 bytes and be put into it. And that's, I think, what maybe not a bug, but an unintended consequence of the pay to taproot, output, the witness size not really having a limit in pay to taproot that ended up enabling like these very large inscriptions that ended up getting in. So I think what Tone was asking was, is the benefit of having that unlimited, at least what we've seen so far, worth the inscriptions that we ended up getting? Because we could put that back as like a standardness issue, right? We could put max standard pay to taproot script size at 3,600 as well, and that would reduce maybe some of the grossest violations of like inscriptions and stuff, where they're putting in JPEGs that are very large and stuff like that. Like, is that a consideration for you, or is this on the realm of op return where it's not worth doing, and maybe it's better for them to put it in witness versus somewhere else where it might do more harm?
So there's a few things here. So on the one thing, script leaves in pay to taproot script path payments, they use TapScript and not legacy script. TapScript changed some of the ways how opcodes work and what computational costs they have. And very specifically, SegWit changed how we commit to the rest of the transaction in an input signature. So the reason why a limit on the script size was no longer necessary in Taproot was because we do not have these quadratic hashing concerns that plagued legacy script. That made it very important to limit the sizes. So basically, we got freer to do other things here, and that is as an explicit design decision in Taproot to allow for bigger scripts here. And now, secondly, to push back on, we could put it as a standardness rule. Currently, we have 20,000 listening nodes on the network, and we have, or in the past 2 years, we had something like 30% of the block space being bought by people that wanted to put inscriptions. If we introduce a new standardness rule that makes mempool policy stricter, and we have already established that 8 to 12% of nodes are sufficient to deploy a more lenient behavior on the network, what stops the people that want to do the inscriptions of just running a few of their own nodes and offering the miners the fees to make those transactions attractive? My understanding is that this will have zero chance of being successful and having any sort of effect.
Okay, so your position then is that the cat's kind of out of the bag, and as long as 8 to 12% of nodes choose not to upgrade to this new standardness rule, that it would just sort of stay on the network regardless. That's
specifically exactly my complaint about what the people were trying to do with the filter movement. I do not think that, unless you actually anticipate getting about 98% of nodes to run this, I think it is just a waste of time, except for the social signal. Now, I don't think that the social signal is valueless, and I think it helped that people very explicitly said Bitcoin is for money. But from a network reality, no effect.
Well, as long as you don't get above, say, 92% or something like that.
I mean, you need 100% of the miners, most specifically, and that's the hard part.
Well, so I guess the way I would maybe let me phrase the question in this way: if you could go back in time to when Taproot was being activated, would you put this rule in at 3600, knowing what we know about how people are going to use it for inscriptions? Or is that not enough of a concern, or it's easily prunable, so you don't care about it? What's your opinion on that?
I think this brings me back to what exactly is the harm that people see in inscriptions. I think the biggest harm is a bit of a culture shift where we might be considered too welcoming to NFT sort of movements, and people are there's gonna be more money in it, and people are gonna support it more. I think this is the strongest argument that the filter movement has brought forth. I don't think. Oh, sorry.
The filter movement. I like that. It's the first time I heard that.
I've heard that before, but okay. Well, usually it's denigrated as filterers or something. But yeah.
But this is not usually the point that is being discussed as much. It is one of the points, but so anyway, from a network resources perspective, yes, the UTXO set grew faster in the recent years. This is specifically caused by the modus operandi of how BRC-20 was designed, which is an absolute shit rag protocol. And if I could go back, I would encourage nobody to ever use BRC-20 and use something like runes in the first place. If they have to do it, at least do the less harmful thing. But other than that, I just do not subscribe to this having had any sort of harmful effect on blockchain growth, on validation cost, or on how the network works, except for this cultural shift. But
you don't think the UTXO
Bitcoin is for enemies, right? So why are we going to decide how other people are going to use Bitcoin for them? If putting baseball cards on Bitcoin is the highest value thing that they want to do with Bitcoin, it's very hard to put Bitcoin is for enemies and we want it to be censorship resistant in the same frame set as, but not this way.
Well, so I'm hearing too, like I hear you keep going back and forth between this, right? Like when it comes to one sat outputs, you're like, policy is great. We want to discourage that. We want to tell the miners don't mind these like one sat output things. On the other hand, if it's something like op return or maybe even inscriptions that are maybe frankly more prunable and easily runnable without those, then you're saying, well, you know, it's filling up undemanded block space. They're paying for it. So it's hard for me to, because you're making two different arguments that can go either way, right? Because
you keep repeting this. I have answered to this 3 times already.
But Jimmy, I actually don't see it that way, right? It's not like, if when Murch says he's advising people not to do something, it's not that he's censoring them from doing it. He's just the same way. He's like, hey, guys, yes, you can you can make one transaction in a block, filling up the op return. Not a good idea. Yes, you can do these stupid BRC-20s. Not a good idea. Hey, these one set, outputs, not a good idea. Why are you doing it? But they're not like built because otherwise it's
no. Because the difference is that the one set output is not relayed. It's not part of policy, and it's not part of the peer-to-peer network. And that's the difference there, right? And that's what we're talking about is policy, because you're using policy to restrict one particular type of what I think we all consider very harmful spam, right? One set outputs that frankly do more harm than perhaps like op return or inscriptions. But like the key is that you're using policy to restrict those, but not using policy to restrict op return, inscriptions, stuff like that.
Yes,
So
and you also
that's-
explained why I have that point, and I've made it a couple times before.
It's not as harmful.
Outputs,
Is that the main?
Are harmful and hurting network resources. Please tell me what network resource is harmed by inscriptions.
Well, so the big thing is, I at least for me, the principle that I go by is monetary transactions versus non-monetary. So I count all three of those as non-monetary. Therefore, I think using policy to restrict them is perfectly legitimate, especially as a node runner. For you, it seems like what's that?
You keep sidestepping my question. Which network resource is harmed by inscriptions?
Well, so you're again, you're coming from a different frame of a utilitarian argument instead of a principled argument. Because if it's a utilitarian argument, okay, what's being harmed by your node by like like relaying, not relaying op return or inscription? I could say the same thing. What's being harmed by your node by relaying a one sat output? It's not going to make a difference. If a miner wants it, that they're gonna hear about it, right? Like, so it's at a principle level and not necessarily a utilitarian one. And I think that's how I run my node. So for me, when you're asking that question, what network resource is harmed by it? It's not about the health of the network per se. It is about my values and why I run a node a particular way. And and I run a node a particular way based on a monetary principle. And and for you, maybe like what I'm getting is that the network resource that gets harmed is not sufficient enough on op return and inscriptions to really like harm yourself at some point by not having these transactions in your mempool when a block comes in or something like that. Is that a fair description of what you're saying?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
I agree. Right.
Mm-hmm.
I think that the harm of inscriptions is the cultural or principal harm, but there is no network resource harm. And I think you just agreed to that. And I actually agree. I don't like inscriptions. I don't think that it's useful. But from a network resource management and what we use policy for, this is a paternalistic thing. And you're just telling other people how they are allowed to use Bitcoin. So yes, your principle is only monetary transactions, and you have you can probably write up a definition of what that exactly is. I think it's difficult because, for example, a lot of these inscription transactions do have a buyer and a seller or make some sort of payment. They are at the very least paying for block space, which is always a Bitcoin payment. So making that argument that they're not monetary transactions might not be as easy as you think, but I want to be very clear. What you're asking for is a restriction on other Bitcoiners, how they want to use the block space. And as long as we're clear, I'm happy for you to have that position, but it's not a network resource in the technical sense that is being harmed here.
Yeah, it's more of an economic principle that Bitcoin is best as money, and that restricting or adding friction to other types of transactions is a desirable goal.
Yeah, right. And I don't agree with that.
Okay, fair enough.
We're moving on. All right. Okay. One topic right before we jump on this topic, so maybe this one will be quick. And then we do want to talk about BIP 444. Murch, maybe you could give us a quick overview on it. This is something new. And what's going on with that? Kind of give us a developer explanation of BIP 444. But I do want to read one comment that says you're trading speed for decentralization. And here's my view on it. And we are going to elaborate on this in future episodes because this is a topic I want to focus on. I don't think people realize how decentralized Bitcoin Core actually is. When people say, get rid of Bitcoin Core, it's almost like some politician is saying, get rid of Bitcoin. And then we laugh at them. It's like, haha, how are you going to get rid of Bitcoin? It's decentralized, right? And then we have Bitcoiners saying, let's get rid of Core, which is, to me, almost equally as crazy as a politician saying, we just need to shut down Bitcoin. We just need to get rid of Bitcoin Core. And what a lot of these people that are screaming, get rid of Bitcoin Core, don't understand is that is the decentralized arm of coding Bitcoin. Even though I'm not always happy with some of the things that are done, a lot of us aren't happy with some of the things that are done. But you have to realize that the alternative to getting rid of Bitcoin Core is one developer controlling the network. That's one of the things that made it so obvious to Jimmy and myself and many others that the Roger Ver and Craig Wright side of the fork would immediately fail. And one of those reasons is not the fact that bigger blocks would centralize mining, but the development of the protocol will no longer be decentralized. So Murch, I would love for you to comment on the decentralized nature of Bitcoin Core, and that it's very easy for people to criticize Bitcoin Core without Bitcoin Core able to defend itself because it's not a centralized entity. Just like when politicians attack Bitcoin, it's very hard for Bitcoin to defend itself because it's not a centralized entity. Can you just explain this dynamic to people, please?
Yeah, sure. So actually, Bitcoin Core, in a sense, is very centralized because it's a fucking repository. And it is a repository that a number of different people choose to work on and contribute to. So it's centralized in the sense that it's a single place where we choose to contribute our work and chat, but it's very decentralized in the sense of who contributes to this repository. So we don't have a hierarchy. There are obviously at the technical level people that manage the repository for us. They are called the Bitcoin Core maintainers. You can think of them as a type of public servant or janitor elected from our midst to have higher privileges on the repository to facilitate the process for us. They go around, they look at pull requests. When things seem to have rough consensus and sufficient support and sufficient review, they merge them into the main branch, and whatever is in the main branch at the time of release gets released as a new version twice a year. So if you're asking for the opinion of Bitcoin Core, there is no speaker of Bitcoin Core. There is no one authorized to speak on behalf of the project. There is no hierarchy. There is no boss. There is no lead maintainer. Nobody sets a roadmap or anything like that. The product that Bitcoin Core represents is emergent in the sense that it is just whatever the people contribute in the course of a release cycle, and what they choose to prioritize, what they think is the biggest bang for their buck, the most important thing, the most interesting thing, and that is what Bitcoin Core gets. Now, a bunch of the people that contribute to Bitcoin Core have been around for a very long time, some over a decade, and they are certainly among the preeminent experts on how Bitcoin works, what we're trying to achieve here, especially on the code base. And there's a lot of history and meta information. There's all these issues and pull requests. So yeah, that's what Bitcoin Core is. It's a shelling point of people that want to contribute to the Bitcoin network. And as Bitcoin is the reference implementation at this time, run by, well, 80% of nodes directly, and in tweaked form by almost all the 20% rest of it too. Yeah, that's what Bitcoin Core is. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So can you? I think the part that I think most people are interested in is sort of the maintainers and their role, which you described. But can you describe how they're chosen or what the process is? Because I think that's where people have a little bit of, that's not entirely clear to most people. And it's like, okay, who are these people and how do they get chosen? And obviously some people have retired and some people have come back, and like what's that process like? I think it would be nice for people to understand that.
Yeah, so generally maintainers are people that have made a splash in the project, that are experts for certain areas or aspects of the code base, and they are not really elected, but proposed out of our midst. And we've lately been trusting the maintainers to choose who they think would help them do the work. But it's sort of an interactive process, a conversation, where people might propose who would make a good maintainer, and the maintainers deciding whether they fit well with the current team or where they need help. And some proposed maintainers have not been made maintainers in the past because other project members had concerns about them taking that role. Others have been made maintainers because the project contributors generally were supportive, and other maintainers wanted them to help with maintenance.
Okay, so if I understand correctly, someone is proposed by the community as a maintainer, and then I guess people comment on it, and then the maintainers sort of say, well, that fits with the current group of maintainers or not, something like that?
Mostly like that, yeah.
Okay.
Again, so Bitcoin Core is a very loosely organized group of people, basically just people that choose to contribute to this repository, the code in a repository. And to coordinate ourselves, we meet. So most of the time we meet once a week, Thursday mornings in IRC, my time zone mornings. And we just go over things that people are working on. This is also where we chat. The other big portion is we just work in the GitHub repository. People propose code changes, raise issues, discuss what should be done, whether that code achieves that, if it's a good approach, and so forth. And the maintainers, basically, they help facilitate this process for us. They're basically are, they put in extra work that they wouldn't have to put in to help us as a group organize.
Okay. And how many are there, and how often do they change, roughly speaking?
Currently, there are 5, I believe. And that would be Fanquick, Hebasto, Glozau, Achao, and Ryanovsky.
Okay. And people like Orion Wool used to be a maintainer, I believe. SIPA used to be a maintainer, and so on. But they've sort of rotated out, or what did they rotate out, or did they retire? What's the process of getting out?
In these 3 cases specifically, they all resigned. They just gave up their privileges, either because they didn't use their privileges anymore and said they shouldn't have them because they weren't using them. In one case, because very specifically the whole Craig Wright saga.
Gavin Andreessen, yeah.
Yeah, he got kicked out. I remember that.
No, I wasn't talking about Gavin. Mara van der Laan specifically stepped back because the whole Craig Wright, she was one of the mentioned.
Orion Wool on
exactly.
GitHub. Yeah.
Or Vumpus, I think, but in IRC.
Anyway,
so the former lead maintainer resigned because she felt that the whole Craig Wright legal conundrum, being sued for, what was it, $6 billion or whatever, that was stressing her out too much, and she took a step back. She recently started contributing again.
So okay. So there's 5, and they get replaced maybe every few years or something.
So, for example, the last edition was Glozau. Glozau got added after SIPA stepped back, and after Marco Falke stepped back, and Glozau specifically was added as a maintainer focused on mempool and policy, because she was working on the package relay project and had been for a few years, and diving pretty deep and working a lot on a certain area of the code, which she then specifically sort of got to be responsible for.
All right. No, thanks for that, Jimmy. Yeah. Well, I want to do a shout out to the 4,000 people watching us on
Whoa.
Twitter. Yeah.
Are you serious?
Yeah, we have 4,000 right now watching us on Twitter. Not a lot of chatter in the live chat, but I don't know why people watch on Twitter but aren't in the live chat. Meanwhile, YouTube, we have like 200 people watching, 18,000 comments. On Twitter, 4,000 people watching, 3 people commenting. It's really an anomaly. But yeah, guys, please like, retweet. We do want more people to watch this so that they actually understand what is going on in this controversy between Bitcoin Core version 30 and the NOTs side of the discussion. Jimmy, you have any more questions about Bitcoin Core? Otherwise, our last main topic is BIP 444.
Okay. Well, I think we've covered a lot of stuff, and I think maybe if I go into some of the other stuff that it'll take too long. So maybe I'll reach out to Murch and we can schedule something ourselves for something like that eventually.
Sure. Let me maybe say one more sentence. So obviously maintainers tend to be the experts for certain areas or the code base in general because they've been around for a long time, and they tend to focus almost all of their time on the Bitcoin Core project. Of course, there's also a little bit of outreach, education, and so forth. And it tends to be a pretty stressful job to help maintain the reference client of a $2 trillion network. So a lot of maintainers just have gotten weird sorts of attention at times, or just also they tend to be among the main people to get the death threats here and so forth. So it just tends to stress out people. Maintainers have in the past often resigned because they just needed to change pace, right? So this is basically how it's going. We are a loosely organized group. We need some people that merge the PRs, that facilitate the releases, that run the website, that are more involved in sort of the security relevant stuff at the project level. A lot of them are also involved at the protocol level, but also, to be very clear, Bitcoin development and Bitcoin protocol development, in my opinion, is essentially completely separate, except for the point where protocol stuff gets merged in Bitcoin Core. It just happens that people that spend all their time working on the reference client tend to have opinions on Bitcoin protocol, right? So it's more like adjacent. Anyway, yeah, maintainers are a stressful job at times. Support your local maintainer, buy them a beer at times.
And it's totally normal for software developers to stay in one job maybe 4 or 5 years and then move on. So it's not a surprise to me that people come in and out as well. So
yeah,
that's something to keep in mind.
Speaking of supporting your Bitcoin developers, people are upset that you are supported and you actually get paid, and somehow that is a secret. Like I don't understand how to explain that. Yeah. Murch gets paid, and he used to be at Chaincode Labs, which he explained, and now, sorry, I forgot.
And BitGo before that, right? So there's been several places that you've been at that are Bitcoin related.
I mean, to quote one Luke Dashjr, it is completely unreasonable to expect that people don't get paid for their work. It's just, you have to find out how you can get paid. And to be honest, we got way luckier than like 10 years ago, where there was almost no money for people to work on Bitcoin full time. But not a big secret. We have to eat too. It's kind of nice to have a roof over your head. And if we're just giving away our work, which we are doing, I mean, you can take it, you can change it, you can run it, you can do whatever you want with the software we're working on. So we're not making money off of Bitcoin Core directly. There is no product in that sense. There's no users. There's no customers. There's no payments flowing anywhere, there, except the way that people have found to get grants or full-time employment for their organizations, basically to pay the developers and donate those developers' time towards the project. Localhost doesn't make money off me working on Bitcoin, except through the donations that localhost research gets, right? So even if I'm not directly volunteering my time because I have to eat. Localhost is volunteering my time for the project. I don't think it's a big secret either, because it's like,
Right.
And it makes sense too, right? Because you want to protect the Bitcoin network, and if you own Bitcoin, then it makes logical sense to put some money towards maintenance and things like that. So, and hopefully all the devs also have that same motivation where they have Bitcoin, so they want to protect their own Bitcoin by working on the software as well.
I mean, let's be reasonable here. Do you think we would all work on Bitcoin if we weren't interested in Bitcoin in some way? So does it pass the
or have some financial?
Right, and I was gonna add to that as well. It's not a conspiracy that a rich person or a rich company is funding Bitcoin development, because that's how they protect the Bitcoin that they are holding. This isn't a conspiracy. I remember having to constantly defend Blockstream back in the day because one bank contributed like $1 million, which was an irrelevant sum of money. Which bank was that? Societe Generale, I think? I already forgot. Oh, AXA. Sorry, AXA. AXA had like $1 billion investment fund. And out of that $1 billion, they contributed like $1 million to invest in Blockstream. And I even remember, I knew the person that made that deal happen, and it wasn't even easy convincing them to put just $1 million in. And that $1 million cost Blockstream such a headache because they wish they didn't take it, right? Because they didn't really need it. And they had to, for probably almost a decade, they had to like defend themselves that they're not like shills for like a bank.
Yeah. So 1A1Z has done great work at doing some research into who pays for Bitcoin development and how much funds there are in Bitcoin development. I think it's 1A1Z.com, where you can download their report. Shout out to Dan and Maz. And so we're lucky. There's more money in this, but also Bitcoin is now a $2 trillion network. We've talked so much about ETFs getting interested. We've talked so much about maybe strategic reserves and so on. And if you think about other things that are worth $2 trillion, you might think of, is it Facebook? Facebook has 20,000 developers. We have 40. Sorry, but if you're upset about people paying for the livelihood of Bitcoin developers, I really don't know.
All right, someone is asking if Citria would survive with no inscriptions. Well, that's the thing. Anyway, we already talked about that question. We're not going back there.
Well, I mean, they're not using inscriptions though.
I think they are actually. They're using inscriptions
okay.
also in some way to put some proofs. But honestly, I hardly know anything about them.
So let's talk about our final big topic, which is BIP 444, and of course, like even the number of the BIP is causing a controversy. But leaving that one aside, let's talk about the contents of the BIP. How did it come around? What is it? And well, just if you can explain it, because I'm a little bit familiar with it, but I would love to hear a more layman's explanation of BIP 444.
So basically, for the past year, people have been telling the filter movement that if they actually want to prevent these transactions, doing so at mempool policy has limited efficacy. And unless they're going to soft fork, they're not going to have much impact. So finally, we've come around to agreeing on the facts of this. And someone has made a proposal on one sort of rules to restrict, to get rid of this data embedding use case. And this is based on an email thread that started from someone proposing to limit output scripts to 520 bytes, I think. And then later, I believe Luke wrote a list of rules that you could implement that would curb a bunch of these data embedding use cases. And this is a proposed temporary soft fork that might activate yesterday and then roughly run for 1 year and basically block a bunch of inscriptions and other stuff that the proponents of this proposal do not like.
Okay, let's elaborate on that a little bit. Jimmy, I see a
so there's a question that I have that I think is kind of prominent on X, which is like, this would be some sort of emergency soft fork in case there's CSAM material. Can you explain that part of it, like how that would work or what the proposed mechanism is? Because I'm not sure I really get that part.
So some segment of the disputants in this great debate are extremely worried about illegal material being in the blockchain. Now, putting aside that illegal material has been in the blockchain for over 10 years, and so far nobody cared, they think that if certain transactions put bad data into the blockchain has to be reverted, and that block has to be reorganized out. And this proposal supposedly would be the tool to do so, to make that block invalid and to create a longer chain with the more restrictive rules.
So it would start on the block before wherever the material is, or something like that. So you would do invalidate block after that, and
presumably
then do something like that. Okay.
Now, obviously, this is not implemented, so it would be pretty hard to activate it.
This sounds very weird. Like that. So this.
Well, it sort of happened with the 182 billion bug way back when. I think there was like 5 blocks, and then people figured it out, and then they went to the block before and then continued it. So
there have been.
I don't want to say that there's no precedent to it, but it would be something like that.
No, but I got questions on this, right? So this would be a one-time thing, or this would be a perpetual thing every time there is this kind of content getting in?
So when nodes were to start to enforce these rules, obviously they would reject any block that does not adhere to these new protocol rules. There's 7 of them. I just pulled it up here on the side. Output scripts cannot exceed 34 bytes unless their first opcode is up return, in which up to 80 bytes are allowed. So extremely restrictive on output scripts, previously unprecedented. You cannot push more than 256 bytes with up push data, which means that
op return is restricted to 256.
No, 80 bytes already.
Or inscriptions.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
The third rule is you can't use undefined witness versions. So this specifically removes the possibility of rolling out a new TypeScript version in the next, however long this would be active.
Wait, this would be a TypeScript version, not SegWit version.
Correct. The TapLeaf version, which indicates the version of TypeScript. So, for example, this would not. This would. So there's various things where people want to do changes to TypeScript in order to introduce new soft forks. All of those would be forbidden for the next year. Annex is invalid. Transactions with annexes are invalid. And another upgrade hook that wouldn't be usable until these rules are loosened. Control blocks cannot be bigger than 257 bytes, which limits a Merkle tree to, I believe, 8. A level of 8. This is obviously going to restrict labitbooz, which is an interesting pattern where someone put data into the hashing partners of the script tree in the control block, which, by the way, is contiguous data and allows up to 4 kilobytes of contiguous data in the witness. And this is problematic if you for example, encode a script tree with Huffman encoding and have some scripts that are very unlikely to be used, and also explicitly rolling back on design goals of Taproot. And then there is the forbidding of any up success upcodes, again, forbidding any soft fork for the next year. And finally, tab scripts executing up if or not if will be forbidden, which, for example, breaks Liana Wallet, Nunchuck, Anchor Watch, and Bitcoin Core power users. So I don't know. The funny first reaction to this was that someone put the whole script proposals text into a transaction that was compliant with this new specification and published the whole data. So
that's pretty funny.
I think this is probably one of the most invasive protocol changes that has ever been proposed. It's proposed to be rolled out on a dime when someone gets upset about a transaction in the blockchain. In hindsight, reorging out blocks, this is fucking with people's money on so many different levels. I think this has a drops chance in hell of getting actively used. I think that the motivation and rationale is mostly FUD and not technical explanation of why we should be doing this. And if we're actually trying to get rid of data embedding in Bitcoin, it falls short. I find this proposal batshit crazy.
Okay, so are there any parts of it that you sounded kind of positive about using consensus rules versus policy to limit some stuff? No, you don't. You don't want anything.
Sorry. The specific point that people were making is, unless you are willing to reorg blocks in order to make stuff not happen in blocks that is consensus valid at this point, you're not going to have an effect. We were not suggesting that they should. We were just trying to agree on reality.
Okay, so you're not. It doesn't sound like you're even open to making some sort of software to limit spam, maybe, or something like that.
So one thing that I've been discussing with people that I find not completely unreasonable is actually soft forking in a limit for transaction size. I think that if you actively want to limit the amount of data that can be put into the blockchain with a single transaction, I'm not advocating for this. I think that this is maybe something that should be thought about.
That might be reasonable, yeah.
Because very specifically, one of the big things that we are concerned about is very big transactions, because they make block template building a knapsack problem, a NP hard problem, which will give people with more computational power in advantage at building better block templates. So limiting transaction weight, that I would not laugh out of the room immediately. This sort of super invasive, very poorly argued, based on an off-shot, hip-shot mailing list post and saying it'll activate before I get home, I have to assign a number immediately. I don't think that is how we should do protocol design. I think that people proponents of this, I think either haven't really looked at it or don't understand what we're trying to achieve with Bitcoin protocol.
Okay, because the original Portland Hodl proposal of limiting, I think it's script pub key to 520 bytes, seems to have at least some support on the mailing list. I think that's like a 40 long thread. Just to be clear, I don't think it sounds like you're too enamored with that either.
I think that is. I haven't really engaged with that discussion. I also was traveling for 3 weeks just before this week. I think that limiting output scripts to 520 bytes would help only with up returns. And as we've discussed multiple times earlier today, we very much would like people to prefer to put data in op returns instead of other output scripts if they must put data into output scripts. So just whacking op return means that basically just whacking output script size and just says people are going to have more outputs to do the same thing. So it takes more block space. It doesn't restrict them in any other way. I think I'd have to look at exactly what the people's rationale was for this proposal and what they're trying to achieve. What they specifically achieve is contiguous data in op returns is limited to 520 bytes. I don't think that's particularly interesting.
Well, so I think if I remember from Portland Hodl's original post, I think he examined all the outputs that were larger than that, and there really weren't very many, and he decided, okay, well that's a reasonable limit, because the 3 exceptions he found were like completely unreasonable kind of outputs that weren't going to get pruned anyway. So like that was the rationale, and a lot of people commented. I think a few people really seemed to take to the idea of a temporary soft fork, which I thought was very interesting, like doing it for a limited amount of time. It sounds like maybe like I don't know what your opinion is on that, actually. When you
so I had a discussion with someone on Twitter this week that claimed that temporary soft forks are a soft fork and a hard fork in one, and I do not subscribe to this. I do think that a temporary soft fork is a restriction on what you're allowed to do in a specific set of blocks, which is a soft fork. I think there's a question of how you start and end that, and how you ensure that people are actually going to loosen the rules at the end of it. I don't know how you would. I mean, if people are concerned about specifically from the definition of how you would define it, the rule is up to that block, and then it doesn't apply anymore. And if people implement the specification, absolutely it's a soft fork. But what happens under the hood is first a rule restriction, and then the rule is no longer restricted. So the rule restriction happens for a certain number of blocks. I don't think that among protocol developers this approach is particularly popular. It's everybody will have to continue to enforce these rules for that set of block height. Obviously, unless something very odd happens, that block height will never be revisited. So we could, even after the soft fork expires, the rules no longer apply, we could probably bury the deployment and pretend that it never happened, because all of the blocks in that sequence would be valid per the later rules again.
Murch, this sounds unnecessarily overcomplicated and insane.
Well, the idea is that you can always go back. That's the thing. It's like
you automatically
if things are done, you can go back.
You automatically
by
go back
default you go back to the previous state. Which I think is actually I've heard this argument from Greg Maxwell before about doing it that way, so that in case you have a dud soft fork, that it's limited in its damage, and then afterwards you're free to move on.
Yeah,
which I thought it's like, oh, okay, this is the first time maybe that we use that. So,
yeah, I think it's not completely insane to consider this. I think especially for a rule like size of something, where there's not complicated protocol restrictions that need to be implemented for the deployment that then later are obsolete. It's maybe
so
not.
This restriction would limit the size of any individual transaction.
Sorry, say again?
This restriction would limit the size of any individual transaction.
I do not think that there's any such rule in these.
Well, that's the one that Murch is considering as maybe possible.
Just to be clear, I'm not advocating for this. I've been bored under the shower and thought a little bit about if I had to fight spam, which I don't, because I don't think we have to. How would I maybe consider doing it? And I think that, for example, a transaction forking in a consensus rule change to limit the transaction size maybe to the current standardness limit, would do a thing, but then again, that would still allow inscriptions of 400 bytes, 400,000.
400,000 bytes. Yeah.
So
but
I mean, it's not
but
interesting from the fighting spam perspective. It would be interesting from the perspective of protecting block template building, especially in the antecedent of people building block templates at home more hopefully, for which we rolled out to roll out support in Bitcoin v30. Oh, sorry, I keep saying Bitcoin v30. Bitcoin Core v30. I very specifically want to say Bitcoin Core is not Bitcoin, but you know.
Mm-hmm. But Tone, the other BIP 444 is has a lot of other things that are not based on transaction size, but like script output size and witness size and things like that. So that would also have the same mechanism of a temporary soft fork, which is time limited. And if it seems good to everybody, they can continue it. But by default, it reverts back after a certain block.
Yeah, presumably this proposal activates by decree at a height to be determined, and then it ends at block height 987,424, which is February 1st, 2027 or something. And
yeah, but all you're doing is pushing the debate out. I mean, we're literally dealing with this right now in the United States, where, well, you two are at the moment, with the whole government shutdown because something was expiring 10 years down the line. And here we are again with the same fucking argument.
Well, I mean, the nice thing about a temporary soft fork is that it gives you a way to back out, because if you do a permanent soft fork, then it really is a hard fork to reverse whatever you did. So that's the rationale behind that, which I think honestly would not be a bad thing for a lot of different soft forks if we're ever to try them.
I would lightly push back on this. Yeah, I would lightly push back on this, given with how difficult it has been to deploy soft forks in the past few instances. Mm-hmm. I'm just not sure whether the effort would be worth it for a temporary soft fork, unless there is like explicit ideas around whether or not to make it permanent if it works. In this specific proposal, I think that the rules proposed, the confiscatory surface makes it an absolute no-go it's dead on arrival for me. And then I just think one of the things that we actually afford ourselves is Bitcoin being programmable money, and it being interesting beyond the first couple million people that discovered it, that already got theirs, and we want to build something for the rest of the internet. Taking out data insertions means significantly cutting back on the programmability of Bitcoin. And it's just short-sighted at this point. We have no idea how we want to use Bitcoin in 50 years. We're setting ourselves up to needing a hard fork if we want to do certain things at that point. It just seems short-sighted and not very useful and outright malicious to people that use certain wallets already with decaying multisigs and so forth that use up if. I mean, I'm using it as a litmus test at this point. People that are actively supporting BIP 444, I think, have not got any acumen in protocol development.
All right. Should we wrap it up, Tom? We're coming up on 3 hours.
Yeah, no, I think we're good to wrap it up. But just like one more thing, it's I will read over BIP 444. But there was also like some kind of a rumor of just removing some of this, or like limiting the op return at the protocol level, or limiting the size of non-financial data at the protocol.
Yeah, that's what we were talking about with the Portland HODL proposal, which Murch already commented on.
But that's different, right? That BIP 444 is not that. That's a
No, yeah. That's the 520 byte, I think.
Right.
Script
So
function
that's
and op return. It would also apply, I guess, maybe to the op return push data as well.
right. So that is just a proposal in discussion that doesn't yet have a BIP because it's following proper protocol chains, unlike BIP 444.
No, that did. I mean, it got submitted properly. It just the number assignment hasn't happened yet, and like. Even if it's like an idea not everyone agrees with, it still gets a number and stuff.
I think you want to push back on that, Murch.
No, Jimmy had that right. I mean, it's just a little funny
back
that
in
the person that came up with the BIP process is so explicitly sidestepping it and then lies about having followed the process. That's the part that makes me a little upset as one of the people that has invested hundreds of hours into the BIPs process in the last couple of years. So for those that don't know, I'm one of the BIP editors. I've been spending a lot of time on revamping the BIP process in the last couple of years. I'm the author of BIP3, which I proposed to be the new BIP process to replace BIP2, which was written in 2016, I think. And so anyway, yeah.
For those that are
do you have to? But okay, if you want, I own this. I
it's
think
on Twitter. It's in the public domain. For anyone
Luke has done good work in the past as a BIP editor. He got too busy with other things for several years now. Other BIP editors were brought on board for a while. There was they themselves couldn't invest as much time as they wanted. We came back to a point where other people were proposing other standardization processes because the BIPs process was just not working anymore. So last April, we added 5 more editors. I think we've turned around the BIPs repository. We've processed something like 500 pull requests. We've assigned 33 new numbers. We're getting a lot of influx in new BIPs now that the BIP process is working again. And then frankly, I'm a little upset that Luke claims to be not inactive. He's left 19 comments in the last 1.5 years. We've put in hundreds of hours, and yes, he's done fine work in the past, but he's not done shit in the last couple of years. And please don't claim to do so. Please don't claim credit for my work. That's just upsetting.
What counts as active in this instance? Like one.
He's just not done any of the day-to-day work at all for more than 2 years, and him saying he's not inactive. Sorry, I just that was what got me upset yesterday.
All right. And
okay.
Murch, look, you're a trooper, man. Thanks so much for joining.
Yeah, 2 hours and 46 minutes. Wow, that's around how long it took us with Adam, right? So.
Yeah. Well, thank you for having me and giving me good and fair questions. Sorry, Jimmy, for pushing you a little hard earlier on what exactly the harm is. I hope there's no hard feelings here. I think it's just we really have been talking around each other a lot by not defining what we're talking about. For example, this whole filters don't work, filters work sort of is just a definitional problem, because if you don't define what you're actually talking about, obviously nobody's ever going to agree on anything. So I'm glad that we could get very concrete here on what we're actually talking about.
All right. Anything else? Murch, people can follow your work on Twitter, anywhere else other than GitHub and the bitcoincore.org?
So for the people that are interested in protocol development, I did recently send an email again to the mailing list asking that people review and hopefully support BIP3 as the new BIPs process. So if you're one of those people, please, I've been working on this for 1.5 years. It would be nice if you read it and tell me that you like it or don't, if that's your sort of thing. Yeah, and then other than that, you can listen to me every week on the Bitcoin Optech Recap, where we go over the development news in the Bitcoin Optech newsletter. And since recently I'm back on Twitter, which absolutely was a mistake, but I guess it's just Twitter rots your brain. But I think there's also been some good information flow. So thank you very much for having me.
All right. No, thanks so much. And everyone, thank you for watching. Hope you enjoyed this episode. Hope you learned something. We are just trying to bring more information to everyone on this discussion of knots versus core. We have a lot of people in our chat that have already made up their minds, and they are, with pitchforks and that core, Bitcoin core needs to go. Surprisingly, the Bitcoin core side, like the pro Bitcoin core side in our live chat, is a lot less aggressive than the pro not side. I mean, I'm just reading your comments, and you're just objectively review comments. We're just here providing you information on both sides and what the potential consequences will be. In our next episode is going to be probably even more controversial. So in our next episode, I kind of want to bring someone on that has been not responsible, but someone that's a little more pro the use of the Bitcoin blockchain for non-financial transactions. And Jimmy and I will do our usual thing and try to push back with tough questions like we always do, because we do want to show you guys every side. And the reason why these shows are great is because Jimmy and I do have somewhat of a subject matter expertise, and we're not just bringing people on and having them say whatever they want with no pushback, as you saw from even this episode and every episode before this episode, where we always challenge our guests. So I'm really looking forward to that episode, and hopefully all of you will be back checking it out. All right, Jimmy, closing thoughts?
Well, I thought this was a really good discussion, and I always feel like when you do things in person or on video or something like that, it's just way more productive than like arguing back and forth on Twitter. And unfortunately, the last 6 months have been almost all arguing back and forth on Twitter, right? Oh, I got you on this point, I got you on this point, or whatever. But most of the time, when you talk to people, like they're a lot more reasonable in person, and you get to see their facial expressions, the body language, tone of voice, stuff like that, and you can pick up on things that humans have evolved the ability to do, and that makes the communication a lot richer, the discussion a lot more productive. So. Hopefully this was as useful to you as it was for me. I think I learned a few things from Murch about how he thinks about, the costs and benefits of particular policies and so on. I'm not saying I agree with everything, but I understand them a lot better. And that's really all I wanted. Hopefully he understands, me better, where tone's coming from better, and so on. So, I appreciate the discussion and hope to have a few more.
All right, awesome. I will do some homework on BIP444 and Portland HODL's other proposal. If you guys could shoot me anything over, that would help me in doing that homework. Thank you so much, and we'll see you on the next one. Please like, subscribe, leave comments on YouTube. I will repost this on Twitter as a thread to the other episodes, and go ahead and leave comments there. And it's Twitter, so there'll be lots of debates. All right. Bye, guys. Thank you all for watching.
Bye.